The rain fell in heavy sheets against the windshield as Detective James Reeves pulled into the parking lot of the 12th Precinct. He'd been driving through this rain for almost 3 hours, having made the trip from Havenbrook where he'd spent the last 15 years of his career. At 55, with salt and pepper hair and lines that etched deeper into his face with each passing year, James had hoped for a quiet transition to retirement. Just 2 more years on the force, that's all he needed. But life rarely accommodates such simple wishes. The transfer wasn't his idea. Budget cuts had closed the Havenbrook station, dispersing its officers across the state. James had been reassigned to Chicago's 12th Precinct, known for its young, aggressive officers and high-profile cases. It was a far cry from the small-town policing he'd grown accustomed to, where he knew every face and most of the stories behind them. James grabbed his worn leather bag from the passenger seat and stepped out into the downpour. His knee ached, as it always did in damp weather, a souvenir from a suspect who'd gotten the better of him a decade ago. He'd never fully recovered, physically or emotionally, from that night. But that was a story he kept to himself. The precinct building loomed ahead, all steel and glass and imposing angles. Nothing like the converted historical building that had housed the Havenbrook PD. James took a deep breath and pushed through the front doors, immediately assaulted by the noise and movement inside. Officers rushed past, phones rang incessantly, and the air vibrated with a tension he hadn't felt in years. At the front desk, a young officer with a closely cropped haircut barely looked up from his computer. "Can I help you?" "Detective James Reeves. I'm reporting for duty. Transfer from Havenbrook." The officer, Peterson, according to his nameplate, looked James up and down, taking in his somewhat outdated suit and the slight stoop in his posture. "Right, the captain mentioned something about that." He picked up a phone and spoke briefly before hanging up. "Someone will be down to get you. Wait over there." He gestured vaguely toward a row of plastic chairs against the wall. James nodded and made his way to the waiting area. Through the glass partitions, he could see the bustling detective bullpen, a stark contrast to the 3-desk setup he'd left behind. He felt suddenly and acutely out of place. 10 minutes later, a woman approached. She was perhaps in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything in their path. "Detective Reeves, I'm Detective Samantha Chen. I've been assigned as your partner." She extended her hand, her grip firm but not aggressive. "Welcome to the 12th. "Thank you, Detective. I appreciate the welcome." Something flickered across her face. Was it doubt? Resignation? "Let me show you around and get you settled. The captain wants to see you once you're set up." As they walked through the precinct, James felt the weight of stares following him. He was clearly the oldest detective on the floor by at least 15 years. In Havenbrook, his experience had earned him respect. Here, it seemed to mark him as obsolete. Chen led him to a desk positioned in the corner, away from the main action. "This is you. Password for the computer system is temporary. You'll need to change it when you log in. Case files are all digital now." She paused, seeming to gauge his reaction. "Do you need help with the system?" James smiled tightly. "I may be from a small town, Detective Chen, but we did have computers. I'll manage." She nodded, though the doubt remained in her eyes. "The captain's office is up those stairs. He's expecting you in 30 minutes. With that, she turned and walked back to her own desk, which James noted was positioned centrally among a group of younger detectives who were now watching him with undisguised curiosity. James set his bag down and took a seat, his knee protesting as he lowered himself into the chair. The computer in front of him was newer than what he'd used in Havenbrook, but not unfamiliar. He logged in and began to navigate through the system, familiarizing himself with the digital filing process. "So this is the old-timer they sent us?" The voice came from behind, just loud enough for James to hear. He didn't turn around. "Heard he's been stuck in some nowhere town for years. Probably hasn't worked a real case since the 90s. Another voice, lower. "Chen's pissed. She was supposed to get partnered with Rodriguez after he transfers in next month." James kept his eyes on the screen, his fingers moving steadily over the keyboard. He'd expected this. It didn't make it sting any less, but he'd known what he was walking into. Young officers saw age as weakness, not wisdom. He'd have to prove himself all over again. 30 minutes later, James climbed the stairs to Captain Frank Dawson's office. Through the glass walls, he could see a man in his early 50s, younger than James but older than most in the precinct, poring over paperwork. James knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Captain Dawson?" "Detective James Reeves reporting." Dawson looked up, his expression unreadable. "Come in, detective. Have a seat." James sat across from the captain, back straight despite the protest from his aging spine. "I'll be direct, Reeves. I didn't ask for this transfer. The department decided to send you here, and I'm short-staffed, so I didn't fight it. But this isn't Havenbrook. We handle serious crimes, high stakes, fast pace. My detectives average 3 major cases a week. Can you keep up with that?" James met Dawson's gaze steadily. "I may not have worked in a precinct this size, sir, but I've handled my share of serious crimes. I'm a good detective." Dawson leaned back in his chair. "Your record shows solid work, but it also shows 15 years in a town with a population smaller than this precinct's jurisdiction. No major drug busts, no serial cases, no high-profile murders in years. With all due respect, Captain, lack of opportunity doesn't equal lack of ability." "Maybe not, but this isn't about respect, Reeves. It's about capability. I need detectives who can handle the pressure of this environment. I've paired you with Chen because she's one of my best. Learn from her, and don't slow her down." Dawson turned his attention back to his paperwork, a clear dismissal. James stood, ignoring the twinge in his knee. "Yes, sir. Thank you for your time." As he descended the stairs back to the bullpen, James could feel the weight of doubt, his captain's, his new colleagues', and now, insidiously, his own. Maybe they were right. Maybe he had grown complacent in Havenbrook. Maybe he wasn't cut out for city policing anymore. When he returned to his desk, he found Chen waiting for him. "Grabbed your credentials while you were with the captain." She handed him a badge and ID card. "We've got a case, double homicide in Lincoln Park. You ready to jump in?" James took the badge. The familiar weight, a small comfort. "Lead the way, detective." The crime scene was a modest apartment in an old building with creaking floors and thin walls. 2 victims, Michael Vargas, 28, and Eliza Vargas, 26, newlyweds according to the neighbor who'd called it in after hearing what she described as a struggle, followed by silence. James stood in the doorway, taking in the scene methodically. The bodies lay in the living room, positioned several feet apart. Blood spatter on the walls indicated a violent attack. No signs of forced entry. Chen was already moving through the space, directing the forensics team and questioning the first responders. She moved with efficiency and authority, commanding the room without raising her voice. James recognized good police work when he saw it. "What's your read?" Chen asked, appearing beside him suddenly. James continued to survey the scene. No forced entry suggests they knew their attacker. The positioning of the bodies indicates they were attacked separately, not simultaneously. He has defensive wounds. She doesn't. He tried to fight back. Maybe tried to protect her. Chen nodded, making notes. "Anything else?" James moved carefully into the apartment, mindful not to disturb potential evidence. He crouched down slowly, examining the area around the female victim's body. Wedding photo is face down on the floor here, glass broken. But the frame on the mantel with what looks like her graduation photo is untouched. He pointed to several other items. Specific things targeted, others left alone. This wasn't a random attack or a robbery gone wrong. This was personal, and the perpetrator wanted to send a message. Chen's expression shifted slightly. Surprise, perhaps, or the first hint of reassessment. "That tracks with what I'm seeing. Let's get back to the station and start building a timeline." Back at the precinct, they began the painstaking work of piecing together the victim's last days. Financial records, phone logs, interviews with friends and family. James worked methodically, his experience showing in the thoroughness of his approach. As the day wore on, the bullpen gradually emptied, detectives heading home or out for drinks. But James remained at his desk, poring over the details of Michael and Eliza Vargas's lives. "You don't have to stay, you know." Chen had returned from the break room with 2 cups of coffee. She placed one on James's desk. "We can pick this up tomorrow." James accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'd like to keep going a bit longer. Something about this case feels familiar somehow." Chen hesitated, then pulled up a chair. "What do you mean?" James pulled up a series of photos on his screen. Crime scene images alongside pictures from the victim's social media accounts. The way certain items were targeted, specific photos, mementos. The killer wasn't just there to kill. They were there to erase something. Something like what? I'm not sure yet. But in my experience, when someone wants to erase history, it's because there's something in that history they don't want found. Chen studied him for a moment. Your experience with double homicides in Havenbrook? The skepticism in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. James felt a flicker of irritation but pushed it aside. No, detective. My experience with human nature. Some aspects of crime don't change with geography. A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken assessment. Finally, Chen stood. I'm going to head out. Don't stay too late, Reeves. First day and all. After she left, James continued working, losing track of time as he immersed himself in the details of the case. It was past midnight when he finally gathered his things to leave. As he passed through the nearly empty bullpen, he overheard snippets of conversation from a small group of detectives still lingering near the break room. Stuck with the old man while Rodriguez gets the undercover assignment she wanted. Did you see him at the crime scene? Thought his knee was going to give out every time he had to crouch down. Heard he got shot in the line of duty back in the day. Guess they give out service medals for breathing in small towns. James kept walking, his face impassive. The comments weren't anything he hadn't anticipated. New guy, old guy, easy target. It would pass eventually, or it wouldn't. Either way, he had a job to do. The next morning, James arrived early, his desk already organized with case materials when Chen walked in at 7:30. Morning, she said, clearly surprised to find him there ahead of her. You're eager. James handed her a file. I pulled the cold cases from the last 5 years with similar signatures. Targeted destruction of specific personal items. Found 3 that might be connected. Chen raised an eyebrow as she flipped through the file. You did this last night. And this morning. I've been here since 5:30. She looked up at him, reassessment evident in her expression. These are good catches, Reeves. I wouldn't have made these connections so quickly. James allowed himself a small smile. Experience has its advantages. The day unfolded in a blur of activity. Witness interviews, forensic reports, background checks on everyone connected to the victims. By mid-afternoon, they had identified a person of interest. Richard Dalton, Eliza's ex-boyfriend from college, who had recently moved to Chicago after years abroad. His alibi doesn't check out, Chen said, pinning Dalton's photo to the caseboard. And 3 friends confirmed he was obsessed with Eliza, couldn't accept that she'd moved on. James studied the photo. How do we find him? That's the problem. He's off-grid. No credit card activity, no cell phone pings. He could be anywhere. James tapped his fingers thoughtfully against his desk. Not anywhere. If this is about obsession, about erasing her new life, then he's somewhere that matters to their history, somewhere he associates with their relationship. Chen looked skeptical. That's a lot of potential places. We don't have the manpower to check them all. Then we prioritize. James pulled up Eliza's social media profiles. Look at her college photos. Every significant moment with Dalton happened in a handful of locations. The campus coffee shop where they met, the lakefront park where he proposed, the restaurant where they had their first date. And you think he'd go back to one of these places? That's pretty thin, Reeves. James met her gaze steadily. I've worked stalking cases before, Detective Chen. When obsession drives the crime, nostalgia often drives the behavior afterward. It's worth checking. Chen hesitated, then nodded. I'll take the restaurant and coffee shop. You take the park. It's the least likely since it's so open. Meet back here at 5 if neither of us finds anything. The park was busy when James arrived, filled with joggers and families enjoying the late afternoon sun. He moved slowly along the pathways, his eyes scanning constantly, his hand near his concealed weapon. An hour passed with no sign of Dalton. James was about to call Chen when he spotted a man sitting alone on a bench overlooking the lake, the same spot visible in one of Eliza's photos with Dalton. James approached carefully, positioning himself to see the man's face without being obvious. It was Dalton. James called for backup, keeping his distance while maintaining visual contact. The man appeared lost in thought, staring out at the water with an intensity that sent a chill down James's spine. When Chen arrived with additional officers, they approached Dalton from multiple angles. James took the lead. "Richard Dalton. I'm Detective James Reeves with Chicago PD. I need you to put your hands where I can see them." Dalton turned slowly, his expression eerily calm. "I was wondering when someone would find me here. She always loved this spot. Stand up slowly and place your hands behind your head." For a moment, it seemed Dalton would comply. Then his hand moved toward his jacket pocket. "I just want to show you something. Hands where I can see them." James drew his weapon, steadying it with both hands. "Now." In the split second that followed, James saw something change in Dalton's eyes. A decision made, a line crossed. Dalton's hand emerged from his pocket holding a small revolver. James fired twice. Dalton fell backward onto the bench, the unfired weapon clattering to the ground. Later, after the scene had been secured and Dalton transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, James sat in the precinct break room, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before him. The paperwork for the officer-involved shooting had been filed, his weapon surrendered for the standard investigation, his statement given multiple times. Chen appeared in the doorway. "Captain wants to see you." James nodded, rising stiffly. His knee had locked up during the hours of questioning, and now protested each step as he made his way to Dawson's office. The captain gestured for him to sit. "Walk me through it again, Detective." James recounted the events for what felt like the dozenth time. The identification of Dalton as a suspect, the theory about locations of significance, the confrontation in the park. When he finished, Dawson leaned forward. "You took a hell of a risk going with your hunch about the park." "It wasn't just a hunch, sir. It was an educated assessment based on—" "I'm not criticizing you, Reeves. I'm acknowledging good police work. You called it right. And when the situation escalated, you handled it by the book." Dawson paused. "Not bad for your first case here." "Thank you, sir. That said, there will be an investigation into the shooting. Standard procedure. You'll be on administrative duty until it's complete." James nodded, expecting nothing less. "I understand." As he left the captain's office, James could feel the atmosphere in the bullpen had shifted. The stares followed him still, but they carried a different weight now. The whispers had changed tenor. Chen was waiting at his desk. Dalton confessed. Said he couldn't stand seeing Eliza happy with someone else. Followed them for weeks before making his move. She hesitated. "Your instincts were spot on. About all of it." James offered a tired smile. "Like I said, some things don't change with geography. Listen, a few of us are heading to Donovan's for drinks. It's kind of a tradition after a case closes. You should join us." The invitation surprised him. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll head home. It's been a long couple of days." Chen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Another time, then." The next morning, James arrived to find the precinct humming with activity as usual. But something had changed. Subtle acknowledgments as he passed, respectful nods, a few curious glances at the empty holster on his belt where his service weapon would normally sit. At his desk, someone had left a coffee and a copy of the Chicago Tribune with the headline, "Veteran Detective Stops Killer in Lakefront Park." As James settled in for a day of administrative work, Captain Dawson approached, accompanied by a man James didn't recognize. Tall, distinguished, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Detective Reeves, this is Commissioner Wilson. He'd like a word." James stood, extending his hand. "Commissioner, an honor, sir." Wilson's handshake was firm. "The honor is mine, Detective. I've been reading your file. Impressive career." James wasn't sure how to respond. His career had been solid but unremarkable by big city standards. "Thank you, sir. Frank tells me you transferred from Havenbrook. Small department out west, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. I served there for 15 years. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Before that, you were with Chicago PD. Started here, in fact." James stiffened slightly. "A long time ago, yes. The commissioner turned to Dawson. Frank, would you mind if I borrowed your detective for a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss privately. Dawson looked between them, curiosity evident. Of course, use my office. Once they were alone in the captain's office, Wilson took a seat, gesturing for James to do the same. You know, when I saw your name come across my desk with the transfer papers, it took me a while to place it. James Reeves, but I knew I'd heard it before. James said nothing, waiting. And then I remembered. The Riverside warehouse operation, 1993. You were part of the task force. James's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. One of the biggest drug busts in Chicago history, and one of the bloodiest. 4 officers lost that night. Wilson's gaze was steady. You were the 5th officer down, the only one who survived. The memories James had spent decades trying to suppress came flooding back. The darkness of the warehouse, the echo of gunfire, the searing pain as the bullet tore through his leg and another grazed his head. The faces of his fallen colleagues frozen in his mind forever. Yes, sir. I was a lieutenant then. I remember the ceremony where they gave you the Medal of Valor. You were still in a wheelchair. James's hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where the medal had once been pinned. That was a long time ago, Commissioner. And then you disappeared, transferred to a small town, buried yourself in obscurity, most decorated officer of your year, and you vanished from Chicago PD like you'd never existed. James met Wilson's gaze. I needed a fresh start, away from the memories. And now you're back, why? Not by choice, sir. Budget cuts closed Havenbrook Station. The department assigned me here. Wilson studied him for a long moment. You never told them, did you? Your new colleagues, about your history here, about the medal? No, sir. Why not? Most officers would wear that like a badge of honor. James looked down at his hands, weathered and lined with age. Because it doesn't feel like honor, sir. It feels like luck. I didn't do anything special that night. I just survived when others didn't. Wilson leaned forward. That's not how I remember it, Detective. You went back into that warehouse after taking 2 bullets. Dragged Officer Martinez to safety. She didn't make it, but you tried. That's more than luck. James swallowed hard. With all due respect, Commissioner, why are we talking about this now? Wilson reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Because of this. Your medal was found in the archives during some renovations. It should never have been there. It belongs with you. He opened the box to reveal the Medal of Valor, its surface gleaming despite the years. I don't, James began, but Wilson cut him off. Take it, Detective. You earned it. And maybe it's time your colleagues knew who they're really working with. James stared at the medal, a physical embodiment of the night that had changed his life forever. Slowly, he reached out and took the box. Thank you, sir. Now, Wilson said, standing, I believe we have some introductions to make. When they emerged from the office, the bullpen had grown quiet. Detectives and officers pausing in their work to watch as the commissioner led James down to the central area. Captain Dawson joined them, confusion evident on his face. If I could have everyone's attention, Wilson called out, his voice carrying authority that immediately commanded the room. I want to take a moment to properly introduce someone who recently joined your ranks. James felt the weight of every stare, including Chen's curious gaze from the edge of the gathering crowd. Many of you know Detective James Reeves as a transfer from Havenbrook PD. What you may not know is that before his time there, Detective Reeves served with distinction here in Chicago. Wilson turned to James. In fact, Detective Reeves began his career in this very precinct over 30 years ago. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. In 1993, Detective Reeves was part of a task force that conducted what remains one of the largest drug busts in Chicago history. During that operation, 4 officers lost their lives. Detective Reeves was critically injured while attempting to save a fellow officer. The room had gone completely silent now. For his actions that night, he was awarded the Medal of Valor. Wilson gestured to Dawson, who stepped forward. Captain, I believe this belongs in your precinct, with one of your finest. Dawson took the medal box, opened it, and looked up at James with new understanding in his eyes. Detective Reeves, on behalf of the Chicago Police Department and the 12th Precinct, I'd like to welcome you home. As Dawson pinned the medal to James's chest, the room erupted in applause. James stood straight despite the ache in his knee, accepting handshakes and pats on the back from officers who just days earlier had whispered about his competence. Chen approached last, respect evident in her eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" James adjusted the medal slightly, still uncomfortable with the attention. "It wasn't relevant to the job at hand." "Wasn't relevant? Reeves, you're a legend. Most of these guys grew up hearing about the Riverside warehouse operation in the academy." James smiled ruefully. "I'm no legend, Detective Chen. Just an old cop trying to do his job." He glanced around at the precinct, seeing it now with the overlaid memories of his younger days. "Besides, respect isn't something you demand by talking about what you did 30 years ago. It's something you earn by what you do today." Chen nodded, a new understanding passing between them. "Well, you've earned mine, and I think you've earned quite a few others today, too." As the gathering dispersed and officers returned to their duties, James made his way back to his desk in the corner. But this time, the journey across the bullpen felt different. The stairs that followed him now carried weight, not of doubt, but of respect. James ran his fingers over the medal on his chest. He'd spent decades trying to outrun the memories of that night, burying himself in the quiet routine of small-town policing. Now those memories had found him, dragged into the light where he could no longer avoid them. But perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing. Perhaps it was time to stop running. Time to face not just the pain of the past, but the possibility that in surviving, he had been given a chance to continue the work his fallen colleagues could not. James opened his desk drawer and placed the medal box inside. He would wear the medal today, for the ceremony and for the memories it honored. But tomorrow, he would come to work as just Detective Reeves, not a legend, not a hero, just a cop with a job to do and experience to share. And for the first time in many years, that felt like enough.